This session is entitled Job Selection, the Myths and the Facts from a hiring manager's perspective. So why don't we start off with addressing that issue head on. And you guys have been with this process a long time. You've been on both sides of the table. You've heard some of the concerns that employees have, some of the questions. What's one of the biggest myths surrounding job selection that you'd like to clear up today? If this is just one of the myths that's out there, which one would you like to clear up and replace it with a fact? Russell?
This one that people talk about all the time. Excuse me. They'll say, well, it's all rigged. You already know who's going to get the job before you go into the process. And I can tell you from a lot of experience on both sides, it's not known until you walk in there and you get to see all the candidates. We'll talk about that a little bit more probably.
Okay. All right. John?
Just adding to that, I was going to say the same thing, but you know, we may know going in based on folks that are on the list or people who have shown interest, you know, who may be a good candidate. But I can tell you, of all the selection committees that I've actually administered or sat on, generally you're surprised in the interview. And in lots of cases, what you thought going in is not necessarily the case. And I think some of maybe the myth around it is a lot of the job selection process is very objective, you know, and it's structured. But there is a lot of subjectivity, as you well know, and I think where we might miss the boat and probably need to work on is the communication. And that's, you know, telling people what we're doing, when we're going to do it, when they can expect follow-up, what we're looking for, and all that kind of thing. So even though we have a very good and solid process, I think there's some things from a management perspective that we can work on, and communication is probably the major one.
Okay.
I'll go next. It's never easy. I have been on several, and again on both sides of the fence. The process is never easy for a hiring manager or for an interviewee. The process is never easy, irregardless if you know everybody on the panel and everybody that's interviewing. The process is never easy. And the thing that's been more surprising to me is how difficult they are becoming. Because as employees, we are getting better and better at making ourselves competitive. And when we do that, what you do is make it taxing on the selection process and on the selection panel for making a proper selection, because everybody is coming in very close. And that's from a stockholder's standpoint, I think that's a good thing, because everybody is getting good. No pun intended.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And that is one of the pieces of regular feedback that I normally hear from employees is that, well, we already know who we're going to select, and we're basically just putting on a show with the selection process. But what I encourage employees to kind of think about is, if that individual happens to be the one actually selected from this vigorous process, then that to me kind of really confirms that the process does work, because in the end, you know, we fleshed out the most qualified candidate. So to me, it kind of confirms, you know, what people are thinking anyway, and it confirms that the process actually does work.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the employee engagement survey, all of the feedback that we get from employees via a number of channels says that the process is a good process, but they have a problem with trust. They like you said, they think that the hiring manager already knows who they want. What do you think is fueling this gap between the perception that we have a good process, but they don't trust the people that's making the decisions and doing all of that? What do you think about that?
Communication, communication, communication. I can't stress how important effective communication centered around the job selection process, how critically important that is. Another opportunity that I've utilized to help, you know, quell some of the distrust is let employees in on the other side of the table. If you have employees who wonder what actually goes on behind closed doors, grab somebody who's going to be working with the individual chosen and let them sit on the panel, and then they will see how rigorous a process it is. They will see how we sometimes agonize over selecting candidates, especially if you have 1, 2, 3 excellent candidates and any one of those 3 can do the job. And once they kind of get, some good ideas as far as what actually goes through in the process, we can utilize those employees to be our mouthpiece to say, hey, they're really not so bad after all. They really are trying to do the right thing.
Okay.
And again, to follow up what Fran stated, the employee that's had the opportunity to sit as a part of that panel must also communicate that as well. We just can't, we as managers can't drive that communication alone. We've got to have people who sit there and who understand that, who see it and say, really, not only did they agonize over it, but let me tell you what the agonization was, how they really came across some angst about doing this versus that. One of the other myths I'm going to get to, Shelton, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Is when we go through this process, we're not just looking at the job that we're filling now. We're looking at not only now, but the next step and the next step. At least that's what I try to keep in mind when I'm filling positions, is we don't want someone to come into a position and stay there forever, because that clogs up the system. We'd like to see movement, change, learn, and go off and do other things. Because now, as an employee, you are becoming a more well-rounded employee. So not only are we just simply looking to fill this position now, but we're looking to see where the fit is down the road in the future, not 2 years from now, but maybe 5 years to 7 years from now.
Okay. Anybody want to add anything to that? Russell?
Going back to the question about the gap between the process and how things turn out, it's very rare that when you have an interview panel, say of 5 people, that you don't have an idea of who you think might be the candidate going into it. But it's amazing how at the end of the day, when the 5 of us are talking about all the candidates that have come through, that it's unanimous as we walk out the door that we've chosen the top 1 or 2 candidates. It's very clear. And it surprises, like you say, the panel itself. And as we bring in outsiders and they're able to sit in on the panel, people that don't normally sit in on the panel, and they're able to do that, they see that process and they realize there's a lot of rigor to it, a lot of discipline associated with it, and it's surprising. I think a second thing that relates to the gap relates to, sometimes I'll have an engineering team, for example, at Metering Services. There'll be a lot of tenured folks that have a lot of experience. And in the job description, we may not say that we're looking for someone with a lot of experience. Now, the folks may be expecting that we're looking for someone just like the rest of them. But when you look at the job description, look at the details, it says we're looking for someone that brings these other skills. Well, if folks don't focus in on the job description and what we're looking for, they're going to think that we chose someone different than they expected, therefore they don't trust the process. So we encourage folks, as you're looking at that and as you come into the presentation, make sure you read the job description very closely, because that's what we're going to be looking for. That's how we're going to be grading. That's how we're going to be making our decisions.
Okay. Well, you opened the door on job descriptions. So, fact or myth? External experience is not viewed as valuable as internal Georgia Power experience. Fact or myth?
Well, Shelton, I think that it is not a myth. It's actually, I think, a fact that's been out there over the years. But I think you got to consider the position that we're hiring for. If it's a very specialized position that may require you to have some company experience or knowledge, then I would say that the external experience might not be as valued in that situation. But I would argue that those situations are probably more rare, maybe the exception. When we go into these committees and look at these things, we're looking for diversity in a lot of areas, and a lot of that diversity can be defined as career diversity or diversity of experience. And sometimes if you've got that external experience in a similar role or something that fits the job we're going for, I would argue that it carries a good bit of weight into the process. It hadn't always been that way. I think over the last several years we've gotten much better. Well, we used to say if you didn't grow up here, you can forget it, and I think that was the message on the street. That myth's probably still out there, but I think we're trying to do a better job. And I would argue, if I'm hiring for a position and you've got experience outside the company, and the rest of the team that I'm going to make you a part of grew up here, probably would force me to put a little more weight on that external experience, because you coming in would make that team stronger.
Okay. Anybody have a different opinion or agree?
I'll agree, but I also would like to add that a job description, and I'm going to use area manager. An area manager in one part of the state may be totally different from an area manager in another part of the state, because it depends on the team that surrounds that particular area manager. You may need an area manager that needs external or has some very hard external experience, because that's what that particular role needs in that part of the state. That may be totally different from another. So when we look at these type of positions and hiring for that individual, the thing that we also have to keep in mind is what team currently sits or will sit around that particular individual, and what diversity that mix would look like with this person being in play versus that person being in play.
Well, Fran talked about communication. Do we communicate these things either up front, during the process, or when we're giving feedback to unsuccessful candidates? Are we doing the best job we can in that area?
We're doing a better job. Don't get me wrong, the system is not perfect, but it's a whole lot better than what it used to be. And what we are hearing and what we're doing is looking at what the feedback has been, molding that system or molding the process to adjust to the things that we need to do, because we all are changing and we all are expecting different things when we move into different roles. And so now, as employees looking to move up in the corporation, we need to know what we need to do in order to move up in the corporation. And getting open, honest, candid, and timely feedback is what is needed. And so we're doing a lot better job at doing that.
Okay. Russell?
You know, we lay out the job description, and we do our best in advance. You're right, we're going to miss some things. And we get in front of the interview committee before the first person comes in, and we say, here is what we're looking for in the person today. These are the qualities we're looking for, and at the end of the day, I'm going to be measuring our final selection based on these qualities. But every once in a while, you'll have someone come in, and as they pitch themselves and their abilities and skills, sometimes you'll hear some skills that you hadn't thought of, and you say, that would be a great fit. It goes back to selling yourself and helping people understand what you bring to the table. That's all part of that interviewing process. And sometimes you'll come across something or a skill set or quality, and you say, you know, that would really add a lot to our team. And sometimes that enters the final decision.
Okay.
Shelton, to add one thing to that, you know, at the end of the day, when you come in and we asked you, we send you a couple of questions up front, so you've got those maybe, and you come in and you go through that interview process, you know, it's scored. I mean, we're rating how you answered the question versus our criteria. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, and we add all those scores up, in most cases, you're going to have some folks that are very close to having the same score. Mm-hmm. But then generally the ones I've been on, we do a gut check, and we just go around the room and ask, you know, what's your feelings? How do you rank them if something doesn't feel right here? So it really turns into a fit and feel, and I think that's when some of these external experience or other things come out. You know, how would person number 2 on the score that's 1 point behind person number 1 might be a better fit for the team that you've got? And I can honestly say I don't remember ever sitting on a panel or administering a panel myself where we didn't have those kind of subjective conversations at the end of the day.
And I want to come back to that, but let me go to the audience for a second and remind you, I want to follow up with a question with John, but be thinking about the questions that you have, because I want to come to our audience next and see what questions they have, and that's virtual as well as the folks here in the auditorium.